Everybody, it's John Kraska, Every Library, the Every Library Institute. It's Banned Books Week 2025. We're having some big conversations, and why do we ban books? What makes the majority of people uncomfortable enough to say that we can't read something, or what makes a special interest group so discomforted that they're going to put in a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of political and social capital in order to keep people from reading. It is a conundrum about the First Amendment in the United States. Congress shall not make any laws to abridge. It's a conundrum about some of the basics, I think, of even common law that says we should just be able to read what we want to read. That those voices, those activists can stop things from happening for an awfully long time. Today we're talking about Fanny Hill, the book. It was banned in the United States for about 215 years. That number just blows my mind, considering that 215 years is a couple of generations. There's a few begats in there. And I have a feeling that Fanny Hill was banned because of so much around begatting. I want to bring in our guests today, please. Chelsea G. Summers. And Jessica Stoya, who have helped to create a new, expanded, and uncensored edition of the book Fanny Hill. Those of you who are keeping score at home, John Cleland's Fanny Hill was published in 1749. It tells the tale of a young woman navigating sex, scandal, and survival in 18th century London. This uncensored edition is a Smith & Taylor classic, featuring an introduction from Chelsea and an afterword from Jessica, exploring everything from Fanny's risqué adventures to the history of censorship and erotic literature and the politics of pleasure. I am really thrilled that we could be having this conversation today during Banned Books Week. Chelsea, Jessica, welcome.
Thanks.
So the big question I've got here for you is, can you give us a sense of the world when Fanny Hill was first published in 1749? Why was it considered so dangerous?
Yeah, so it was published in two parts, one in 1748 and one in 1749. Mm-hmm. John Cleland had written it in conversation, originally in the 1730s, in conversation with a friend of his, responding to a French erotic book, L'École des Filles, which was apparently wildly dirty. And Cleland wanted to write a dirty book that didn't have any rank words, which I think in part he also felt like would keep it from getting banned. So he didn't originally start writing it with the intention to publish. He was in Bombay, India at the time. He came back about a decade later. Within a few years, he had racked up a monstrous debt. He was in debtor's prison. And at that point, he was like, oh, crap, what do? I will revamp that book, publish it, make some money. We'll be fine with the world. And so he first published the first half with Ralph Griffiths and his brother under the name F. Griffiths, which his brother's name was Fenton, sort of as a ruse to keep the various bodies from following up on exactly who was publishing it. Mm-hmm. And the first half wasn't banned. The first volume did fine. And I think that's probably because it's there's a lot fewer sexual escapades than in the second half. And it has a lot more feeling. And so it kind of fit rather neatly into the 18th century concept of both amatory fiction and fiction of sensibility or feeling. Then the second half came out, mm-hmm. which was in 1749, and Cleland was still in jail. About 3 months later, or about a month later after the publication, he was sprung from jail. He had about 6 months of freedom, and then he and Ralph Griffiths got arrested in November of that year. At that particular time, and I'm not an expert in British legal history, but at that particular time, there was a movement from policing obscene books from sort of a guild, which was called the Stationers Guild, Stationers something, into criminal. And so it went from being kind of self-policing and ecclesiastical courts to being common law criminal courts. So Cleland, his publisher, and actually the printer were all arrested, and they spent a few days in jail, and they weren't exactly charged, but the book was banned. And so they were sprung free. Only a few hundred, maybe 1,000 copies were sold. Within 10 years, they kind of revisited the whole thing, and they put out a Baudelarized copy of the book, and then they got arrested again. The book got banned again, and they were sprung within a few days. And sort of within a decade of all of that, in Britain, obscenity went from being a criminal charge to being a civil charge. So people stopped getting arrested, but books ended up in lawsuits. However, just because it was banned didn't mean it went out of print. There are at least 14 versions of the book during the 18th century. So we're talking about 50 years, and there are at least 14 versions, and then many more on the other side of the 18th century. So even though it was banned, it just meant that it wasn't available in bookstores except under the counter, and Cleland didn't make any money, nor did his publisher.
What a saga. I mean, dead or prison, and then getting picked up for pornography, basically. What a crazy situation. And it mirrors the change from it being a civil matter and something that is looked at as regulatory into that criminal space is what's happening in the United States right now. I mean, this past legislative session, the state of Texas decided to allow for the criminal prosecution of librarians, educators, and a few other professions under obscenity law. Really, since the the Kennedy administration era, there hasn't been criminal prosecution of those professions. I mean, it's such the shifting definitions of obscenity and the shifting definitions of morality that are resident in this book are just like it's everything old is new again on this one.
Yeah, personally, but this is in part because I was an 18th century scholar during, a former life. I feel like we are very much the children of the 18th century. A lot of the things that we take for granted, like a reading public, an open press, global economy, bedrooms, heterosexual marriage, and even the bourgeoisie, as well as things that we are unfortunately inheritors of, like systematized racism. They all have their roots in the 18th century. And so I think we are very good, for better or for worse, children of the very long 18th century.
Well, they call it the Enlightenment, but sometimes it was pretty dark.
Yeah.
Jessica, tell me about the dangerous part of Fanny Hill and why John Cleland and his co-writers and his publisher were arrestable.
Were arrestable?
Arrestable. Like they could be arrested.
Arrestable.
Yes. Sorry, that was a bit of a turn of phrase there.
I am not sure what is objectively dangerous about sexuality or the reality of bodies, which Fanny Hill much more broadly describes than, say, modern pornography, which is very limited to it's hot, great. But throughout recorded history, sexuality has been something that governments have felt a need to dictate the terms of and suppress visibility of options outside of the terms that are dictated. Also, Edward de Grazia's Girls Lean Back Everywhere charts the entire history of obscenity prosecution in the United States. He's like a big law nerd, lawyer, but also like super, it's this big and the print is this big. And he makes a case that you can track obscenity prosecutions against the timeline of the United States government being up to activities that they might want the population not to notice. And so obviously in recent decades, we don't have that data because we don't find out about these things until way after. But throughout the history of literature being prosecuted in the United States for obscenity, seems like he's got something, with legs there, which leads me to be very curious about the political context of England at the time that Cleland was being prosecuted for Fanny Hill.
That is a fascinating study, and that timeline. Can you tell me again who that was before you put the book away?
Edward de Grazia.
Thank you.
Right.
Because we know very clearly from the work that we do here at every library, we've been on the ground now with over 150 anti-censorship, anti-discrimination campaigns that are trying to put books back on the shelf, but also restore the dignity of the reader. Because so many of these books are anti-person, or so many of these book bans are anti-person. They're discriminatory at their core, and it tends to be used by political actors in order to build their political base. It tends to be used by political actors to distract. And that's happening in 2022, 2023, 2024, and 5. And in the 1740s in the UK, 1760s in the UK, that's very interesting to me, Jessica. The history of how erotic literature has been policed isn't necessarily about the content, it's about the circumstances.
I also I apologize. It's compulsive. It's a little bit off topic of books, but I feel like it's relevant.
Yeah.
If we're broadening discussions of sex from literature to graphic video representations or attempts to do sexual education on social media, like the censorship started this wave started a few years previous with video pornographers and sex educators. And we did collectively try to raise the alarm, but to little avail.
Absolutely. And the one of the vectors for the book bans right now in libraries and schools is it's about being against the teaching of sex ed and the teaching of sex and sexuality. It's a straight line. And the gong that was being rung a few years ago went unlistened to because it made people uncomfortable. There was a survey that was done by Common Sense Media a few years back, about 20 months ago, where they asked a statistically significant sample of American teenagers, where do you get your pornography? And 0% of them said the library. And I always come back to that one because the regulatory forces against the library, whoever figured out how to put library into this mix, and they'll get a QAnon Nobel Prize. Where the issues are is not in that type of institution. There tends to be other institutions out there that are looking to be those sources, I think, of trouble for kids. All right, let me ask a little bit about the book itself, because you both took a bite out of something that is a little esoteric. I mean, it's, the 1740s, 1750s in the UK, and yet you wanted to resurface this as a work of art, a work of literature. The new introduction, the new afterword. Why does Fanny Hill as a book still matter in 2025? Why should Americans be reading it? Why bring it back? Why bring it back into circulation?
Well, Fanny Hill became available in the U.S. Openly in 1963, shortly after Grove published Tropic of Cancer and Lady Chatterley's Lover. Then Putnam decided to put out Fanny Hill, and it got banned in Boston. And I'm old enough to remember when banned in Boston was sort of a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And then it eventually, it went to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the ban was overturned in 1965, and it became available. There wasn't a lot of scholarship done on it until really starting in the 90s, and then once again it fell out of favor in sort of the 2000s. And I think that it's important to read it and to teach it, not only because it is an abiding work of literature, but also because it tells us a lot about how we got to be who we are. One of the reasons why I enjoy reading literature from 100 or 200 or however many years ago is being able to draw that critical line between what we see, how we think, what we believe now, and what those roots are in the past. And there's a lot that happens in the text of Fanny Hill that explains a lot about our attitudes of not just sex, but also gender, and also good sex as opposed to distasteful sex, and how those things have changed and why they're problematic, and what made people uncomfortable in 1750, but also what continues to make people feel uncomfortable now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it has a lot of intrinsic value. Even though the language is weird and the language is funny, and also I should say the book was intentionally funny, like Cleland was very clearly parodying, like Samuel Richardson's Pamela, Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders, and other works. That kind of, historical grounding is important.
In your introduction, the lit crit part of this is really interesting, and contextualizing it with those other novels or those other works, but the politics of pleasure that
Mm-hmm.
you talk about in the introduction, Chelsea, and the idea that there's a shame-based narrative of sex that is a recurring issue, and it's something that we're feeling right now in the United States. I mean, how does Fanny Hill help push back against that, especially with this new edition?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm not sure that I hope that the new edition does that. But I think that the book itself, Cleland wrote it with the intention of espousing his belief of rational pleasurism, which is very 18th century and even slightly earlier, so very long 18th century belief. What's the word? Not libertarian. They weren't born yet. Libertine belief that that sex should be fun for everybody, and that the actual physical pleasure, the enjoyment of it, is as important as anything else going on in that sex. At the same time, there are limits, both rational limits and what I would consider irrational limits, and those are the things, you know, that Cleland sets out in the text, and those are things that, you know, will make people feel discomfort. But yeah, I think that he does push back against a sense of sex being, as it increasingly was beginning to be seen in the 18th century, as a procreative activity. It came out, he wrote it during a time of a huge watershed moment in the understanding of not just genders and gender roles, but also sexual roles in specifically heterosexuality, but not limited, not exclusively heterosexuality.
It's very interesting. The Jessica, in the afterword, you talk about you connect Fanny's story to questions of sexual agency and representation today, and I think that conversation is a difficult one for a lot of readers. But there are parallels that you drew in the afterword between 18th century London and today's cultural debates. Bring a couple of those to the surface for me, because the discomfort of folks is not a good reason to ban a book or to ignore an issue.
I completely agree. I also have the working memory of like a steel pasta strainer. So could you help me out with like a specific?
Well, just the idea. So sexual agency and representation, and the work that you do in this afterword to suggest that I don't want to say everything old is new again, but that there's nothing that different. We're having the same fights again. Why can't we get past it?
God, if I had the answer to why we can't get past it, I'd tell everyone and we'd get past it and we'd be done with this.
You know,
it'd be fantastic.
It's so funny to me that like right now we're a year away, a couple months away from America's 250th anniversary. This book was written at a time when the colonies were still writing their own constitutions. This predates the Republic, you know, and it's not get out of my bedroom, get out of my bookshelf should be the ethos. And yet the government and these special interest actors, sexual agency scares the devil out of people.
Well, fun fact, Benjamin Franklin had a copy.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
When you said
he did
before, he flashed in my mind. So.
Yeah, no, he absolutely, it was among the books in his library. And you know, like there are records of copies being sold and or printed all over, especially the Northeast. So, you know, during the nascent years of America, both before and after the signing of the Constitution, you know, like New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, like all of these places, there were black market copies available. So, yeah, I mean, I think that while the UK wasn't banning Fanny Hill for the same fundamentalist reasons, the same fundamentalist, you know, Christian reasons. I think that is, you know, like that kind of strict puritanical, you know, worldview was in operation when the book was banned in the 1820s here in the US, and what was happening in, you know, throughout the 1960s until, you know, the ban was overturned. I mean, one of the holdouts on the Supreme Court said that he felt like the book was just the story of a harlot. And the story of a harlot has no redeeming value. And we are continuing to fight this fight. wherein, you know, there are those of us who say, no, every voice has value. And then the people who say, no, only certain people's voices have value, and we get to decide.
I think part of the I'm just such a glutton for punishment. I think part of the reason we're on this hamster wheel of, you know, cycles of relaxing and then banning works and people's existences and all of that is time and time again, the dominant voices in progressive movements, for instance, not Mary Wollstonecraft, specifically not her, but her peers who were like, well, you know, obviously, like it's men who should have rights, but only like the white men and only the ones with like, shh, Mary, be quiet. You're going to make everything too complicated by saying everyone should have rights. And the same thing happened with the push towards gay and lesbian marriage equality in the United States. It's like, well, you know, if we just separate out, it's like just like normal, but they happen to be of the same gender. So like, can we be okay with that? And so rather than making a big, massive, we're going to die on this hill stand of actually everyone's okay, the tactics each time are, but could you be okay with like a little more broad of a definition of person and a little more and a little more? And that I think we can look at history and see that that hasn't really gotten us anywhere profound in a way that has stuck.
Yeah, the idea that we're still having a debate about the nature of marriage, which is at the core of a privacy matter. You know, that we're having debates about sexual agency at all in this modern era is a head scratcher to me. It's pre-modern in so many different ways. I would like to check in one more time about the book, though, if I could, because the foreword and the afterword. Chelsea, you wrote the foreword. Jessica, you wrote the afterword.
We had a
conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's true. Yeah. Let me rephrase. The approach that you took together is humor and also a certain kind of sharpness about the issue. But it was funny to read the forward and the afterword. It was serious to read the forward and the afterword. What should readers be comfortable laughing at? Not to use the word discomfort like that, but like this thing's fun. This is a funny book.
It is a funny book. You know, I mean, sex is funny. Like you really can't like divorce the sheer absurdity of sex from, you know, writing about sex or talking about sex or even writing about a book that writes about sex. At the end of the day, when you think about, or the end of the night, whatever, you think about what people are doing in bed, there is an absolute absurdity to it that is wild and refreshing and joyful and needed. And I think, you know, I think that kind of sensibility is desperately needed, especially now when we talk and write about sex.
Jessica, tell me a little bit about your perspective here, that humor that you wanted to bring to those conversations, that bookend the book, and also that what do you want people to take seriously?
I feel like people really take sex too seriously to such a degree that I'm reluctant to encourage anyone to take it more seriously.
Yeah.
And I think really it's in the same way that thoughts that you have on the inside of your own head that you keep to yourself or, you know, share privately amongst, you know, with people you're quite close with are very unlikely to harm anyone. Like reading Fanny Hill and saying, this turns me on, or this is really funny. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about the ways that most sex shown in widely accessible media is really misleading or actually just sexual assault, that can cause damage. But like just a person with a book
Mm-hmm.
having their own relationship with the book, their own reactions, like you're fine.
Mm-hmm.
You can just have that and like allow it to be what it is.
I think in particular, when it comes to books, there is a, forever, like really seriously forever, as long as people have been reading and writing, I mean, whether you're talking about, Plato, or whether you're talking about Sir Philip Sidney's defense of poesy, or you're talking about this conversation now, there is always a need to push back against these forces that that are frustrated because they cannot police what is going on inside our heads. And when you read a book, it is it is you and this intimate relationship of the words on the page,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever it is that you see in your head and the thoughts that you have. And there are people, for reasons that I can't fathom, who find that deeply unsettling and wildly inappropriate, and that just feels insane to me.
Yeah, the reading is a private act in so many different ways, and how you're inhabiting a story, how it inhabits you, is the whole reason that George Orwell talked about the thought police in 1984. And the policing of that in private moment, that independent thought, is at the heart of censorship. Okay, last question. John Cleland, if he was alive today, what do you think about this whole situation that we're going through around the world in the United States? I mean, Jessica, what do you think about Mr. Cleland's perspective potentially?
I'm so distracted by Bob the dog.
Sorry.
Bob the dog is very cute.
He's such a good boy. I don't know that it just feels weird for me to project, reactions and intentions onto historical people.
That's fair.
I mean, I think, like, as an author, he would be like, cool, do I get more money?
Yeah.
But as a human, he was very ambivalent about the book. Like, he really tried to distance himself from it, and he was really cranky at the world that it was the thing that he was best known for. So I think he would have a very divided reaction. That said, as somebody who I think pretty seriously believed that everybody should have sex and have fun, at least publicly, everybody heterosexual. Privately, I believe he probably had different experiences. He would be wondering, why is this philosophy so dangerous?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that so Smith and Taylor Classics is publishing this new edition with your intros and afterwards, and I think it's important for folks to take a moment with it. There's a scholarly conversation here. There's a bigger conversation, though, about what it means today around pleasure, around censorship, around restrictions, and around thought, that I really appreciate you both bringing forward to our watchers and our listeners today for Banned Books Week. Chelsea G. Summers, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Jessica Stoya, thank you too. It's been an interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. And again, folks, the Smith and Taylor Classics edition of Fanny Hill. So, and Dogs and Cats.
Right on cue.
All right, team.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Hold on for me in the
Thank
green
you.
room. Okay.